All right, I see some people are joining, so I'll give it few more moments for more people to get in here. Awesome. All right, well, thanks for all joining today. Welcome to Coffee and Cargo. We're happy to have you guys here. We have some good things to go over. Some quick introductions. My name is Rachel. I work in the marketing department. Emily Smith also works with me, doing some content marketing as well. And then we have Justin Engelmeyer, who is our vice president here at Interlog, and Benjamin Schwingle, who is our international operations director. So Justin and Ben will kind of be leading the conversations today and offering some good insight as to what we're currently seeing with some of the topics today. So to get into it a little bit, we do have an agenda. So we're going to kind of start with the Chinese New Year and tie in Winter Olympics and give you guys a good idea of kind of what to expect before, during, and after Chinese New Year. And then we'll go into the Ningbo situation and what Interlog's seeing with that. And then we'll also tie in with the FMC Regulating Capacity at the end and kind of what's going on with that situation and what we're seeing. And then at the end, we'll just do some current events. I know last month, for those that did join last month, we talked about the new customs requirements for Mexico shipments. There's some new updates on that, so we want to make sure we touch on that for you guys. And then we'll end with the new LA port fees that are potentially happening and kind of what that means for some shippers. So before we begin, I just want to let you guys know that we do have a Q&A that we're going to be doing at the end of the webinar. So as you are listening today, if there's a question that comes up, please get it in our Q&A, and we'll be answering as much as we can at the end of the webinar. So I will let Ben and Justin take it over.
Sure, thanks, Rachel. So, yep, as we all know right now, the big issue, the main thing that we're working towards is getting cargo out before Chinese New Year. It's something that we go through every single year. This year it's slightly different, a little bit more demand for capacity, and there's the Olympics in China as well. So a few things a little out of the ordinary. So anyhow, February 1st is when the official Chinese New Year starts. And so again, that's earlier than we normally see, although next year it's going to be even earlier. But right now we're still getting some capacity before Chinese New Year. So you're still able to make some last minute bookings. But the expectations on what actually happens with that is it can be a little bit confusing. What that really means is that we're going to get your containers, you'll be able to load it, and we'll be able to in-gate it. When it exactly departs, we don't necessarily know just because of some of the delays here. But Ben, can you touch base on that? What we're seeing for the past couple of weeks, we've actually been making bookings for kind of that last week in January. So if people do have bookings for that last week of January, what exactly are they? Well, what should they expect on that?
Every situation here is dependent on the factory or the supplier, and the importer should be in communication with all their suppliers to know what their schedule is for the next 12 days. Still plenty of time to load containers and return them to the seaport. However, what we're hearing is a lot of factories, if they don't have a booking order or some kind of confirmation that an empty container is going to be arriving at their factory to load, they don't want to keep staff waiting around for a possible container to unload. They'd rather send their employees home early for the holidays and shut down the factory. So when we're talking about making these bookings the next 12 days, there's vessel space available, but we need to have quick communication to let the suppliers and factories know, stay open, here's your booking, here's the date that the container will be arriving. And you're asking, well, what's likely to happen with the vessel delays, which always happen every year as we go into Chinese New Year. Vessels start coming into the ports, but they trickle out. Well, the schedule will shift to the right or later, but the containers are still in-gating in these next 12 days. So they'll be loading the vessels throughout Chinese New Year. The important part was they got loaded and they got returned to the seaport before Chinese New Year. So they're first in line to get on the vessels rather than wait until after Chinese New Year.
Okay, so a couple of things here. So a big part of it is whether or not your factory is still open, whether or not your factories are open that last week. And if they don't have forwarders contacting them in China saying, hey, we have bookings for you, these bookings have been made, your factory might choose to close down ahead of that. That's what you're implying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then the importer needs to be cognizant of that and make sure they're communicating with both their forwarder and their supplier, letting them know if they need something out that last week, and making sure that they're preparing for it, making sure that the factories are actually still open, because a lot of them, again, are going to close if they don't have stuff departing. And then a little bit, I forgot to mention it, most of the bookings that we're still seeing, or the capacity that's available right now, it's on more of what's called a premium booking, a higher price, a higher rate than your FAK or whatever your standard rate would possibly be. So we have been able to find bookings, but they've been at a premium, so they're costing a lot. But again, with some of these factories closing down, I believe we were discussing that last week in January, the rates actually are falling down a little bit. So at least there's some positive news out of it.
That's right. So the beginning of January to the middle, the prices on this premium market were pretty high, just as high as they were in peak season of the summer, like in August. But this last week, as factories are closing down and the demand for these containers is dropping, the price is coming down slightly. It could be 5–10% lower than 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago, the vessels are departing right now, and those containers are already loaded in the terminal. For those savings, if the factories are remaining open for the next 12 days, they can still load containers for those savings and be on vessels that depart the first week of February. But yeah, it's premium. They're not going to find space, especially new space, new bookings right now at that.
Sure. And so then again, if it's loaded and they're going back into it and it's straight back into the seaport, those vessels are going to start trickling out. There are some workers that are going to be there for the carriers. There's going to be some vessels coming in, and there's also going to be some departing. Might be a little bit of a delay, but still they should depart at some point throughout the Chinese New Year. And then let's talk about this. So the Chinese New Year, technically, it ends here on the 15th, but you have some employees starting to come back around the 9th. So some of the factories are going to start opening up. So are we going to have some bookings available around that 9th, do you think? Or is it more going to be after the Chinese New Year on the 15th?
Expect the bookings for departures after the 15th. Terminal operations will continue through Chinese New Year. And the first week of Chinese New Year is observed by everyone. And then their personal preference, they start returning to work, usually in that second week. And then after Chinese New Year, the Lantern Festival on the 15th, will be everyone back at the factories and the terminals and all the freight forwarding offices. So if you're looking for good communication, it'll happen after the 16th, but there'll be someone to talk to in China with your freight forwarder after the 9th.
Sure. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about how the Olympics are going to affect things too. So if most people are going to be back to work on the 16th, so after the Chinese New Year ends, and some stuff should go back to normal at that point in time, but the Olympics are going on now. So that's still a lot of stuff is going to be shut down on the northern side of China. So what areas are we looking to open up, or are you anticipating to be more open? And what areas do you think are still going to be pretty closed down?
Yes. I go to my visual map of China. In the north, you have Beijing, where the Olympics are being held. North of there is Dalian, their small port, and Harbin is another city where a lot of the Olympic activities will happen. In Xi'an to the west, so that whole northern area, those are like the main manufacturing cities. But below that, there won't be much disruption from the Olympics, because there's not a winter Olympic activity farther south from Beijing. And that's port cities like Qingdao, Huzhou, Shanghai, and Ningbo. And of course, your South China Sea, Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Yantian type ports. Those
So most of the big ones will be back up and running.
You'll see most disruption around Beijing or Tianjin.
Sure. Okay, perfect. And then with that being said, the Olympics end on the 20th, so everyone should be going back by the 21st, and then at that point in time, everything should be opened up. With the high demand for capacity going into Chinese New Year this year, and we were seeing stuff. I mean, even customers reaching out, asking about freight between the week of Christmas and our New Year, the calendar New Year. That with that type of demand, and we've seen it, we've felt it. There's been a high demand here for capacity. What do you see for the demand after the Chinese New Year?
We're still on these record consumerism levels, and there'll be demand for space just like there has been through the summer and fall.
Sure.
Anyway, we've seen enough of these annual trends where it's a dip right after Chinese New Year. There was that slight dip in the premium market before Chinese New Year. And after Chinese New Year, you start going into the BCO contract season. That's 2 months of negotiations between importers directly with the ocean lines. Last year, the minimum number of containers required to start making those contracts rose to several thousand, and it's already risen again to a higher level. There's fewer BCOs with access to the carriers, meaning more containers will be booked by forwarders on these open markets that have the driving the rates higher, and as the carriers kind of manipulate capacity to keep prices high. All that to say, this year after Chinese New Year, we can't expect to see any substantial drop in the prices.
And it didn't really happen last year either. I remember moving into Chinese New Year last year, and after it, there was still a high demand at that point in time too. It wasn't like previous years where there was a fairly significant drop off and kind of a lull season there. So I'd agree with you. I don't really foresee it dropping off a ton myself either.
Last year was kind of the carriers getting a feel for what they can charge for that space.
Sure.
In January was when you went from your normal Trans-Pacific rate of, let's just say it was around $3,000 in January or so. And by June, it had risen to 3 or 4 times that.
Sure.
And there was just a straight linear increase from January to June, not a slowdown after Chinese New Year.
Sure. All righty. Rachel, what do we have next up here for us to chat about?
We'll kind of go into
Ningbo.
the Ningbo situation. Yep.
Sure. So there was a COVID outbreak in Ningbo, and China has their zero COVID policy that they've been trying to pursue. Ben, can you talk about this for a moment here? Because we still have customers calling and asking us about this and asking what we can do in Ningbo. But to the best of my knowledge and what we're hearing is that it's pretty much been fixed, and it only lasted a few days. Is that accurate?
Yeah, thankfully, this is one of those exercises we've become accustomed to where we get news either during our nighttime or right away in the morning that there's been some change due to COVID, and we need to adapt and adjust. So a lot of our Ningbo bookings shifted to Shanghai bookings because trucks couldn't go out of Ningbo and they couldn't go into Ningbo unless that trucker was willing to be at 14-day quarantine after delivering the cargo to the Ningbo terminal. And all of this leading up to Chinese New Year, right, February. So for 3 days there, we spent a lot of time shifting trucks and bookings to Shanghai, which is the nearest port to Ningbo. And after about 3 days, the policy changed and truckers were allowed to return to normal operations. And that's not to say that Ningbo and all the other ports don't have these precautions in place for truckers still. That's slowing down the movement of goods into the terminal and causing more of a congestion of truckers. But that particular issue in Ningbo is resolved, so to speak.
And so I guess if there is good news about that, to look at the positives here, what we thought could be somewhat catastrophic for people that are importing from Ningbo and have factories in the Ningbo area, while again, you're mentioning congestion and stuff that we're seeing all over the place, and maybe it's even delayed a little bit further. It's not shut down for 2 weeks. It's not, it wasn't quite the disaster that it could have been. So if it does happen in another city, in another port, at least it seems like, you know, it'll be figured out pretty quickly.
I agree with that. There's always considerations to, it is China, and they're making sure they're watching their terminal levels. Ningbo was at or nearing capacity for how many containers they could hold there. And this COVID outbreak built a little bit of relief because fewer containers came in for those 3 days. And there's always a second side to it, which is the terminal congestion.
Sure. So I guess for those customers that are still asking us about the situation in Ningbo, a reasonable solution to that would just be contact your forwarder, have your forwarder contact the supplier, and also reach out to the supplier yourself. And if for whatever reason you're still being told it's an issue, please do contact us. We can have our people help out and reach out to your folks at the factory as well. So, because it should be done with. So, all right, Rachel. Up next here, I believe we have the FMC Regulating Capacity. This was an interesting bill passed by the House. And from the best of my knowledge, they're putting the FMC, or they're saying that the FMC could be in charge of regulating capacity and actually deeming whether contracts between private businesses are quote unquote fair. I don't know. I know that there's a lot of issues and people want these issues resolved. There's a lot of congestion, rates have gone through the roof, but just having another firm go in there, having the FMC go into something and regulating something and doing something that they've never had to do before, I'm not sure. I feel like that's something that could even happen, even if we wanted it to happen. Ben, what are your thoughts on this?
I agree with you. I think that the intent is good, to try to reduce the rates back to a reasonable, steady level. And that's what the government wants to do, is help build some consistency. But that comes with government control. And I'm not certain that the Senate will agree with the House and pass a similar bill. I think that they're going to either scrap it completely or rewrite something where it limits FMC's ability to judge what is a fair contract between the ocean carrier and these the BCOs, or the importers.
And I mean, I feel like even if we could kind of get into that, and they're looking at all of that, and now they're able to open up what used to be private information, if anything, that's going to cause further delays. I'm not sure how that becomes a more efficient way for them to go around this. Anyhow, and Ben, did you read that there was an article in, was it FreightWaves, that had someone mentioning and talking about it was the president of some organization that
World Shipping Council.
Yeah, and he also kind of thought that this might fall through as well, and that the Senate would recreate their own policy and start fresh, something a little bit more basic, something that wouldn't be quite as hands-on. So, you know, while it's good intentions, I don't know how they're going to really follow through with it.
How long will this last? This is an unprecedented intrusion, some people would see it, by the FMC to regulate what types of commodities even are shipped in and out, and limiting the number of containers in a contract, the MQC, by type. And it just really hinders the free movement of the free market to adjust up and down according to what we, the consumers, are demanding.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I know on here, Rachel, we have the question of what does this mean and how could it impact the industry, and what does it mean for the importers? At this time, I'd say nothing, because it's not in place, and I don't have any idea what it's going to look like if something actually does get put in place. So I certainly don't think it's going to be what they have in place right now, or what they're trying to put out there. I think it'll change no matter what. So I have no idea. I don't know how this is going to affect people. It'll be interesting. It'll be something that we'll talk about again on one of our upcoming webinars.
Awesome. Well, we'll kind of end with some current events. Go over some of these.
Sure. So last time we were talking about this new regulation for people crossing the border from the U.S. into Mexico, Mexico into the U.S. And they have to set this protocol up. And if they don't do it, there's going to be a $4,500 fine on it. But that's been postponed. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see when that comes through. And Ben, you want to talk about the
new import fee?
Yeah.
Everyone's familiar with this schedule of costs. It's the same $100 a day for every day after a certain time. Here it's 9 days. But this was the empty containers that are filling up the Los Angeles and Long Beach terminals for export back out of the United States. Same terminals, same congestion, but the empty containers. And this can be explained the way that there's 3 stances each ocean carrier is taking right now in Los Angeles. Either they are not allowing any empties back into the terminal, or they're allowing empties to come in only if you have a scheduled full loaded import container to take back out of the terminal. So it's a 1 in, 1 out. Or a third stance is just to allow empty containers to be returned just as normal. We're seeing 2 carriers, sometimes 3. They're notorious for that first stance. There's refusing empties back in. That's One High Lines, WHL, and Costco. Second stance is very common too among carriers, and then they move between these stances pretty regularly, week after week. You have to be watching with your drayage companies to know what their permissions are that week. Also be working with the drayage companies that are large enough to have enough containers going in and out of the terminals, different terminals, so they have those appointments to retrieve a loaded import container and swap it. And if you're not working directly with the drayage companies, work with a forwarder that's working with enough drayage companies and big enough drayage companies that has enough import containers to keep your empty container going back out. If that makes sense.
Well, and what I find interesting about this one, we had the other fines that were going to come out at $100 per day, and then it's going to multiply by $100 or whatever. So it'd be $200 for day 2 and $300 for day 3, and so you're adding up, and it's this astronomical dollar amount. Before, though, it was containers that were filled with as they came in and as they sat out in Long Beach and stuff. So the importer easily could have been billed for those. The carrier is going to put that on whoever's cargo is on that container. They're empty containers. So it doesn't really feel, I don't see how the carriers can go back and bill one of the importers or exporters for that matter. Do you? Because I don't know how they can do that. This looks like this would just sit with the carrier, which so be it if it goes through, but I'm not sure this really affects our customers.
Per diem expenses for not returning a container to the terminal within their allotted time, even if they're allowing it in, if you have an appointment to pull another one out, or they're not allowing any in. So there is a way for them to penalize customers, but not in the same way that we saw with the loaded import containers. What this is really doing is forcing all these empty containers to sit around Los Angeles in truck yards, hopefully not on chassis. If it's a drayage company that has a truck yard that can lift on and off containers and stack them in their own stacks, that's good. Otherwise, they're taking up space on chassis that are needed for going in and out of the port. But you see what the terminal's overflow of empties, they gotta sit somewhere. You're sitting in truck yards.
But what drayage company wants to have a bunch of empty containers sitting in their yard?
Well, if they have enough in and out business, there won't be a lot. But if they're a smaller company that doesn't have, they're going to have to find a place for it. And these smaller companies don't have the machinery to take on and off containers, and that's why they'll be sitting on chassis.
So under what situation do you think the carriers, I guess the more important question, if you're an importer or an exporter, how are the carriers going to charge you for this? How is that money going to go back to the importer, back to our customers, back to the people that we're working with, and not just sit with the carrier?
In the form of a per diem fee, so if demurrage and per diem, for a number of days, you're allowed to let your containers sit in the terminal before you retrieve it and unload it, and the number of days you have until it has to return to the terminal. So if you can't return your container to the terminal, you're at risk of paying per diem charges.
Sure. All right, so that's
and storage charges from the trucker, yard
Right.
storage, chassis rental fees from the trucker.
Sure. All right, so that's something that I think people should be talking to their or looking into as we figure out when this is. You know, we haven't heard if this is going to fall through or not. I'm not sure it'll go through. They tried to push the other one through, and it was delayed multiple times, and then it just kind of fizzled out. So this will be interesting to see if they can make it stick, so to say. That being said, Rachel, are we now we have some time for our Q&A session?
Yeah, and we got some good questions coming in. So at this time, if you guys have any questions that you haven't put yet in the Q&A, please do so. But I'll let Emily take it over for the Q&A portion.
Yeah, there are some great questions in here. But Ben and Justin, a few years ago, carriers were operating at a loss and rates were a record low. Now with rates increasing and pretty high, where do you guys see the rates moving in the near future? And if the FMC were to get involved, where do you also see those rates going?
Well, I think that, you know, right now the rates are at a very high premium. And as long as capacity remains the same or the demand for capacity remains similar, I think they'll stay there. I'm not sure without that demand increasing, I don't know how they can get higher. But without it dropping, I don't really see it, without that demand, the rates aren't going to be there. They're not going to sustain. They're not going to stay at the same height. So it's really just what the demand is. And so it seems like the demand is still as high as ever. And so the rates are going to go wherever that demand goes. Ben, you see anything differently than that? Is there?
Agreed. I would forecast similar conditions throughout the whole next year, possibly 2023. It's a little early to start talking about that. But for this next year, expect the demand to drive the rates to similar levels and in similar ways up and down that we did see in 21.
Yeah, and by then, I mean, they're still going to bump up and down, but it's not going to.
Yeah, the pre-holiday rush, like in August, September, you'll see the lowest probably in May. If we don't have a sudden drop in March after Chinese New Year, but I don't expect that to happen because demand's just so high right now. And to answer that question, the second part of that was if the FMC gets involved. I'm just imagining what Senate bill might be, but if it came out to where they're regulating the price and the capacity that these ocean carriers are given to certain BCOs, there's still going to be lots of vessel space that's being sold at this premium market. So there's going to be high demand for that space, and that's the market that most of us importers have to be working with because we're not Walmart or Target. And those rates are going to go up just as the free market demands.
All right, we'll finish up the Q&A with this. Any news on Brexit? Is the U.S. still poised to benefit?
Brexit?
Mm-hmm.
There hasn't been any more news about a U.S.-UK trade agreement. Indications are there that there is one inevitably going to be written in the next few years. It could be this presidential administration or the next.
All right, well, that will wrap up our Q&A session today. Rachel?
Awesome. And I see there's some other questions, but due to time, we would be happy to reach out to you guys to answer those. So if you want to reach out to us specifically on some questions, please feel free to reach out with sales@interlogusa.com. We would be happy to have a conversation on anything related to any of these topics. And then another thing that we do promote is instead of having to sign up each month, we do send out a monthly webinar mailing list. So if you do enjoy these webinars that we've been doing every month, please email myself and I'd be happy to put you on that list at rachel@interlogusa.com. And just another thing is our next webinar will be Wednesday, February 16th, 10 a.m. Central Time. We hope you can make it then. There'll be some good topics there, I think, kind of after the Chinese New Year and going kind of into next steps on that. So thank you, Ben and Justin, for all the insights today. Emily, thank you. And we'll see you guys next month.
Thank you.